lifelong interest in healing, Dr. Linda Salvin pursued an advanced degree in epidemiology. Then, after dramatic near-death experiences, Dr. Linda saw the other side and returned with gifts of insight, visions, and revealed wisdom. Now those gifts are ongoing, and she's here to share them with you. Get ready to be amazed. It's time for Dr. Linda Salvin's Psychic Solutions podcast with America's original radio psychic, Dr. Linda Salvin, offering up her always fascinating blend of psychic psychology, clairvoyant insights, and expert guests and alternative healing methods. So pull up a chair and get ready for a visit with the one and only Dr. Linda. And now, live from Los Angeles, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Linda Salvin.
Hi, folks. It's me, Dr. Linda. How are you? I am the host of Psychic Solutions podcast that you can hear live Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, it's uploaded on 100 different platforms across the universe. So wherever you are listening, I want to say hello. And I'm bringing back a friend of mine that I grew up with here in Los Angeles who's calling in from Israel. His name is Moshe Chertoff. Moshe has been in Israel as a resident since 1974. And without me introducing him again, he's going to recap what we did a few weeks ago. But since we spoke, Israel had released and kept, well, they found 4 hostages, got them released, but 8 people have died. And it's still a mess over there. So let's bring on Moshe and catch up with the latest news from Israel. Hi, welcome back, and thank you for taking the time again. I really appreciate your contribution, and
thank you for having me.
You're so well versed. Of course, you're so active over there with living in it. So why don't we pick up where we left off? Just for those that haven't listened, a few weeks ago, if you go Google or search for what we were talking about, Israel, an American-Israeli conversation, you see it in the archives. But now we're going to pick up. Moshe gave us a lot of history as to the Palestinian laws and the land and the history of how it all began, 3,000-4,000 years ago, and the fighting and the British and just the whole evolution of what goes on. But now we're coming up to date because we know that the war started on October 7th, again, the latest, 2023. And then there were some hostages. And there were some brutal activities between the rapes and the murders. And I don't want to talk about it. But now 4 hostages were released, but 8 people have died. Please bring us up to date, Moshe.
Okay.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. When I start thinking about it while you're speaking, I'm choking up. It's difficult. In our last broadcast, I tried to fill in as much of the background information about what life is like here. I think we were talking about the fact that I'm an Angelino-Israeli, that we grew up together in Los Angeles. And I have a lot of parallels that I use when explaining where I live, for instance, to the Lebanese border, as where I lived in LA to the San Fernando Mountains. I'm actually only, as I'm speaking to you, I'm a little over 10 miles from the Lebanese border. I can see it if I walk out.
Stretch those.
Yeah. And you know what? It was beautiful. I love living up here, and it was great. The area is called the Western Galilee, and it's part of the official state of Israel. It's not any territories that are in dispute or anything. But it got pretty ugly on October 8th. On October 7th is when the Hamas attack occurred and the war began. And then the other terrorist organization called the Hezbollah, who are not they're not a Palestinian organization. They're a Shiite Muslim organization who are trying to show that they are also supporting the cause of the Palestinian people. And I have to say, from this point on, let's get it straight. I'm also for the Palestinian people. I'm one of those unusual people you'll probably not hear very much about in the United States. And I wouldn't say that we're the majority in Israel either. But I'm one of these people who believes that to actually be pro-Israel, you also have to be pro-Palestine.
And I agree with you, because it's all about peace everywhere. We have to accept each other. And what I think you're saying, because I believe the same thing, I look at the unrest on the campuses. I've got a friend that I've introduced you to that's heavily involved with what's going on at UCLA because we're local. But overall, we're humans. No father or mother, child, teenager, college student, adult needs or deserves to be killed.
That's
It's
right.
the government or it's the extremists who are fighting. So we, the innocent people, are being bombed, killed, murdered, shot, captured, whatever. But it's
even
people,
without that, we're hostages to a situation. All
but
of
we're
us.
just people. We're just trying to live our life. And I feel sorry for a lot of the people. I can't pick sides. I see the flags, but you're in it. And I agree with you because we're the human race.
Right. So I would say that the two sides, as you just said, the sides, I don't think that the sides are the Palestinians versus the Israelis.
What is it?
Two sides are those of us who realize that we are all human and that we have enough understanding and education about what brought us to this moment where we're fighting as if it were for our lives, all of us, for the people. Palestinian people are fighting for their lives. The Israeli people are fighting for their lives. The state of Israel is fighting for their lives. The people who would like to have a state of Palestine are fighting for that. All of this fighting is taking place. And the difference is that there are those of us who have that understanding that eventually we're all going to live here. They're not leaving. We're not leaving. It doesn't matter who they and we are. So if that's the situation, if that's the reality and an actual understanding, so as we used to say in Hollywood, let's cut to the chase. Let's do this. Why can we not live together? And you also expressed the reason why. And the reason was you used the word extremists and governments. Unfortunately, both governments, the government of Israel is run by extremists. It's the extremist tail that's wagging the dog, which is our current Netanyahu government. And in Gaza, it is the Hamas who is waving the dog of the Palestinian people. They don't represent all of the Palestinians, and they're extremists too. If either of, I'd say if both of our sides were less extremists, run by extremists, we would be over with this. And if you understand that you're going, let's look at this. Israel made peace with one of our most right-wing and stern prime ministers, Menachem Begin, back in 1979, 1980, and those couple of years after that. We made peace with the country that had the largest army in the Middle East. Now, if we can do that, and it's held until today, we have not had a war with the Egyptians. I've never spent an extra day of reserve duty in the military, in the IDF, on the Egyptian border. I served in the Sinai before there was peace. I served in many different places around. But if we can do that, and we've all since then made peace also with the Jordanians to our east beyond the river, as people call it, and that's the Jordan River. And we've made peace with various countries around the Middle East. Why can't we do it with our neighbors? And to make it even more supposedly simple, the people we're supposed to make peace with are the Palestinians, and 21% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians. So almost all of my friends who are Palestinians have family, excuse me, have family in Gaza. In fact, I had a young man who called me 2 weeks after the war started to tell me that his uncle's family, almost all of them were killed in Israeli bombings. And what can I say to him? I can say to him that I'm sorry that the Hamas attacked and began this war. There was no provocation from the Israeli side to start this war.
But he's coming to you in pain, but it's almost like he's asking you to save or help, or it's your fault, or what are you going to do about it?
No, I've also met he invited me to come to his village, which is just across the fields from us. It's like a mile and a half away. And he invited me to come to meet his uncle, who came from Gaza. And I met his uncle, and that's why he called me, was to let me know that his uncle's family, and they're very typical. Let's face it, when you have however many thousands or tens of thousands of Palestinians who've been killed, and the exact number is really irrelevant. Let's face it, if it's actually 34,000, or if it's closer to 48,000, or if it's 38, that's ridiculous. Of course, there shouldn't even be 1,000 people that should be killed, and we're talking about a large percentage of them being civilians, women, children, elderly
The
men.
innocent, the real innocent.
Exactly.
Same thing with the Ukraine and the Russians. I mean, war is war. When we grew up, it was Vietnam, right? I mean,
I'll ask you a question. Did you, back in the Vietnam War, think that all Vietnamese were the enemy? They all wanted.
Well, when I was uneducated, I didn't understand because you would hear the media, and back then we had TV, black and white, and then I went to color. But before I understood humanity, before I understood how it worked, I thought, it was them and us. They were like teams. Like we would have on the playground and volleyball or basketball, whatever we played. But tetherball, I was just going to say that too. I had a vision of that. But over by the bungalows, you're bringing me back. What, 60 something years, Moshe? Yeah, it is.
I didn't say it.
No, I did. I'm not afraid to. But I think judgment and the lack of understanding as children, because we're given pictures or the maps back then when they had the big scrolling map. It's them, it's territory. Or one teacher used to say Saudi Arabia, and it's like, well, what is all of this? Just like economics. And I didn't know, we were learning terminology, but as we grew, we began to see people are people. We go to school, we go to kibbutz, wherever you go in life, you're traveling, and there's a mixture of races and religions, and all of a sudden we're one family. It's not just us who were secluded Jews in our little neighborhood. The world opened up.
Right. Well, I have sad news for you. It's not only when we were children. And here's where the final point that I wanted to make on this introduction to the whole topic is that it's a matter of understanding. War and violence usually come from a lack of understanding of the other. And that is usually because of a lack of either willingness to understand the other and accept the other as myself, another human, or sometimes it's a lack of education and people who don't understand. So if we understand that the French and the Germans fought 2 world wars against each other, and even today, I don't think there's great love between the French and the Germans. But if you would have told someone a week before the end of World War II that not only would you no longer be at war with them, but you'd be able to cross the border from Germany to France or France to Germany without even having a passport, without stopping for someone to say, excuse me, where are you from? Nothing. They're at peace. Is it a wonderful peace that they all love each other? No. In Northern Ireland, in Northern Ireland, there are on the 2 sides of one street, Catholics on one side, Protestants on the other. They still hate each other, but they have a peace agreement. By the way,
we grew up during that when the war ceased, and we grew up watching the Berlin Wall come down. We have witnessed evolution and peace, but
So if a week before World War II ended, and I would have tell you this stuff, you say, I don't know what you're smoking, but bring me some because you sound whoa. Yeah, you're not exactly with 2 feet on the ground here. You're woo, okay. And here we are. And it's an absolute reality. And of course, there's problems between France and Germany, and there's problems. And by the way, there's an interesting side of the North Ireland situation. On those 2 sides of the street, one side of the street is also filled with Israeli flags, and the other side of the street is filled with Palestinian flags, because these 2 sides have some sort of understanding that these are the sides they're supposed to support. But let's forget that.
Let's take it back to Israel. But you're giving great examples that it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just where you are. I mean, this has been going on since day one of life,
Right. So what I'm saying is that we have a government that is not of the understanding that we are all humans. They are of the understanding that some of them, I shouldn't say all of them, some of them actually, excuse me?
Is it more about power?
Oh, when we're talking about governments, it's always about power. First, it's about politics. And once they have the power, then we're talking about the power. And most of them don't usually want to relinquish that power. No. But in a more democratic society, you understand. Of course, you relinquish the power. That's why we have elections. And if the people don't like what we're doing, they supposedly take us out and somebody else in the hope that
to repeat the cycle with a different administration.
A new flavor. No. But we've had a government which has, let's put it this way, since 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu has been prime minister for Israel almost the entire time. And just in the last 5 years, there had been 5 elections in a cycle that took place within 3 years. He lost all 5 elections. He could
And why is he
not.
still there?
He's still there because
Power.
no. In this case, it's there's reasoning for it, real reasoning for it. In the first 4, nobody succeeded in getting an actual government. In the 5th, I take that back. In the first 3, no one got it. In the 4th, my party and my political side of the spectrum actually formed a government, an alternative government. And we stayed in power until it was only a little over a year. I had friends who were ministers and whatever. This was not a peace government. This was not something about the right versus the left. This was more the people who support this autocrat, Benjamin Netanyahu, and those who were opposed to him. And we fell when a couple of people pulled out of our government and we lost the majority. The Israeli Knesset, the parliament, has 120 seats. And that means you need 61 to have a majority to have a government.
Right.
And 2 people pulled out. That was it. We lost it. So there was another election. And again, he did not win. But he realized that because he has been indicted on some very, very heavy charges. Yeah. He was, let's see if I can remember. He was invited for breach of trust and for, he has 3 major indictments against him. And he realizes that once he's out of the government, once he's no longer prime minister, he's going to go back to court. And if he goes back to court, he might go
in jail.
Prison will be for, yes. And therefore, what he did was he said, I'm not going to take a chance on having another election because I didn't win. I could, again, lose this election. What did he do to make sure everything's going to be hunky-dory? He brought in the worst elements in Israeli society. Anti-democratic, theocratic, racist elements in Israeli government. He brought them in so he could boost up his support, his base of support to 61. He got up to 64, which means he was in clear sailing. No one was going to make him fall because 1 person or 2 people dropped out. And this is what gave him the ability, having 64, to say, here is our platform. And he gave the platform to his voters, the platform of his party, 5 points. When he got into power, he didn't touch the first 4 points. He immediately jumped to number 5, which was a judicial overhaul, as they call it, or a judicial reform, they called it. We called it a judicial upheaval. What he did was he was trying to take, and this is all important for the peace process. This is, I'm not going into this for no reason.
No, I understand, but it was a bait and switch. He promises everything and then does his own thing, even though he lied to the people.
Again, this is when he started getting wagged by the tail, which means that he had to take in these extremists. But once you've got them in, you have to feed them. If you don't feed them, they will constantly say, wait. If you don't do what we want, next week we're leaving your government, you will fall. So he is constantly feeding them on racist and horrific topics and this legislative overhaul that they wanted. Can you imagine if a party comes in and they said, we have 150 laws that we're going to pass in the next three months?
No.
150, which includes changing the standing of the Supreme Court. And in Israel, we only have 2 branches. We don't have 3 branches. Like in America, you have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, right? Well, in Israel, the legislative and the executive are the same branch. So that means we only have 1 branch that can check the power of the other. And they wanted to take all of the power away from the judiciary. And we're all going, wait a second, this is a self-coup. You can't do that. And we started protesting in January of last year. I started at the second demonstration. The first demonstration had 8,000 people. The second demonstration already had 80,000 people. I remember being interviewed on CBS in the pouring rain with 80,000 people. We were like, whoa. And we didn't stop for 39 weeks straight. For 39 weeks straight, there were approximately 200,000 Israelis in the streets every single Saturday. And that was all across the country. The American equivalent of 200,000 Israelis is over 6 million Americans. Can you imagine in America?
Right, in comparison to the numbers. That's
coming
a lot
out
of people.
for 39 weeks. What stopped that flow? Let's put it this way. Our goal was to topple that government and say, you cannot do this kind of stuff. It's unconstitutional. Oops, we don't have a constitution, so I guess you continue. It was really problematic. And then what we were saying all along, I remember saying this to being interviewed, and that was, this government will lead us to a catastrophe. None of us ever thought the catastrophe would come from across the Gaza fence, because we had always considered, like, we're the roughest, toughest guys. No one's going to be able to do anything. We can stop everybody and whatever we want. Oops. What happened was that these radical elements that were there, they're among the people who have that set up and maintain and continue to set up more illegal settlements. Why is a settlement illegal? Because they're not doing it within the state of Israel. They're doing it in occupied territory that we conquered in 1967, but we've done nothing with it. We've neither annexed it, which the whole world would be against our annexing about 1 million Palestinians and their land into our country, or give it back for peace. Do some negotiation.
But they do nothing. It just sits there in limbo.
No. So what happened was we all got so pleased with the fact that, hey, look, they're making 10 times more than they ever made before we started occupying their lands. Why should they complain? Look at their houses. They have much nicer houses. No, there is no such thing as a benevolent occupation. Therefore, eventually they rose up and said, no, we're not going to have any more of this. We want our own state. We want to be able to. They don't have the right to vote. If they don't rule any contiguous area of land. But in 2003, I actually edited an entire peace agreement called the Geneva Initiative Final Status Agreement, which was negotiated between a team of negotiators from Palestinians and Israelis. Now, one would think, oh, peace, these people, these leftists are going to give it all away. They really don't care. No, we're talking about former chiefs of staff of the IDF. We're talking about generals. We're talking about all sorts of people. And this thing was signed by both sides. It's all finished in 2003.
That was 21 years ago.
That's right. And
look at us today.
That's right. Because
now let's bring me up to date. Okay. I'm telling you, you need to become an elected official in Israel. And I can say I know him when,
so what's happened?
You're just so versed, and you're just so passionate, and you're just so enlightening. And the problem is not enough people hear this side of what's really going on, which is the balance. It's not the Palestinians versus the Israelis. Just like you, I see beyond the flags and the anger and the fighting, that there's just humans trying to express themselves. Personally, I don't know that marches ever make a statement, even though you had how many, if it was the equivalent of 6 million here in the States, how many, 80,000 there? What'd you say?
No, 200,000.
200,000. I mean, that's huge. I remember watching them march on YouTube or TV or the news or whatever, and it was like, wow, they're gaining momentum. But how, and I know I'm not the only one that asked this, Moshe. Mm-hmm. If we, meaning Israel, you, are so well protected with aviation and electronics and everything.
We thought we were.
Yeah. How did they get through with the missiles? I still don't understand what failed. I don't know where the break is. Did you guys figure it out yet? Does anybody?
No, we've not purposefully not held an inquiry commission. I think that's how we say it in the United States, to actually find out all of the details why it happened. But I can tell you the basis of why it happened. So far I've given you a background as to where the country was until October 7th.
Yeah, you're beautifully explaining it. It's wonderful.
Right. So October 7th was when we ended our 39 weeks. It's not that we just gave up or the government fell. All of a sudden, we have a crisis that in 2 days, over 1,200 Israelis were murdered. Hundreds of Israelis were captured, and we're talking about civilians. There are also soldiers, but we're talking about hundreds of civilians were taken hostage across the Gaza fence into Gaza. Men, women, and children, including friends of my daughter-in-law, who have a baby who was 9 months old when he was abducted, and his brother's 4 years old. And we've got 85-year-old men and women.
Are any of these people that you personally know or that your family knows? Do you need water? Do you need to get some water? Are they still alive? Are they
Nobody
still?
knows, because when you're fighting against a country sometimes, not always, tends to manage its war according to the Geneva Conventions. That's not the Geneva Initiative. Geneva Conventions, which were signed in 1949 to dictate how wars should be fought, how innocent civilians must be protected, how occupying forces must supply all of their needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're dealing with a terrorist organization, they don't play by any rules. So the International Red Cross has not been allowed to visit any one single
like a camp
hostage, not one single hostage. Now, this number, by the way, that I'm wearing here, the 255, is the number of days since October 7th. And I change the sticker every day, and I consider us still on October 255th of 2023. In many ways, the country stood still since then. And yes, I personally knew one young lady who was abducted. Oh, I shouldn't say a young lady. Well, yes, 39-year-old woman who was born here on my kibbutz, which she grew up here, and she married someone who lived along the Gaza fence, and they built their home there. And on that morning, on October 7th, there was shots being fired in the area. Her husband ran to get his pistol. That's another story. That's all he had, was a pistol, no armor, no long guns, nothing. And he went out and said, I'm going to see what I can do. Closed the door behind him. An hour later, he called his wife and said, lock yourself into the safe room. We have this little bomb shelter within our houses, and lock yourself in, and I'll call you again. He called her an hour later and said, it's rough, but we'll be okay. And that was the last time she heard of him. Apparently, he was killed. He was fighting. He was killed in action, and his body was abducted into Gaza. And a while later, she, in her safe room, began to smell smoke and realized if she doesn't leave, she's going to suffocate from the smoke. So she opened the door, and there, standing in front of her were two Hamas terrorists with guns.
So they got the husband and they went after the family. Where is she now?
She was on a kibbutz. No, she is from a kibbutz that 1/4 of its population was either killed or kidnapped. 1/4. 400 people, 100 of them were either killed or kidnapped. And I know some of the people that were killed.
I feel like crying. I feel like crying.
Yeah, I buried a grandmother and her granddaughter together after they were found a couple weeks after they were murdered. Excuse me. I went to a memorial of a woman who was one of the founders of one of the biggest peace movements in Israel. And that's what we're talking about today, is peace. So we'll get away from the war soon. But almost all of the people who live in those kibbutzim along that border, along that fence with Gaza, they're members of peace organizations. And many of them came to live there because they wanted to prove to the Gazans that we can live as friends and neighbors. And that was the case for many years. And all of a sudden, everything all broke down. Now, why did I say I'll go back to the gun? Why you only had a gun? I mean, if you're living on a border like that and you've got the Hamas on the other side of the fence, which is only, a mile away, this government decided to make all sorts of other priorities, which had nothing to do with any of the priorities of the country until now. But it's the tail who have those priorities. Among the ministers from that extreme party is the now Minister for National Security. He runs the police. This guy was a convicted supporter of a Jewish terrorist organization, and they made him the cat that's protecting the cheese. He's now the Minister of Security. What he did was he took the guns away from them along the border where they had emergency response teams, and he gave it to their friends in the West Bank, who then went and did horrific things. We're talking about a Jewish pogrom You know what I mean by pogrom?
I've had it explained to me, but please redefine it and to the listener who does not know, because
Okay.
it's still a term that's not
Okay.
often heard. Please.
Okay. Jews are, I shouldn't say used to, but let's put it this way. Until there was a state of Israel, Jews, especially through Europe, but in other places also around the world, in some of the Arab countries where we lived until 1948, were subject to mass violence, mass murders, rape, and the whole thing. Their villages would be burned down and
Like
everything.
they're doing again.
Yes, like if you saw Fiddler on the Roof, there was a pogrom there. You saw it. There's anti-Semitism, which goes back hundreds and hundreds, and some people will tell you thousands of years. And it's horrible. I mean, it was always against the Jews. And all of a sudden, today we have Jews who are doing a pogrom against Arabs, against someone else. I mean, how crazy does that seem that a person who suffered from that for so many hundreds of years should now turn and do that to someone else? That does not make sense for almost any Israeli. And I'm talking about the great majority of Israelis just said, that can't be. What's going on here? And that's what was going on. In other words, here I'm answering your question also about how could that happen? How could they just come across the border? Well, not only did they take the guns away from these emergency response teams, but they also took away a few battalions of Israeli soldiers who were standing guarding that fence. And they took them to the West Bank so that they could protect their friends who were perpetrating pogroms and attacks on Arabs. They burned down almost an entire village. One person was murdered, and the houses were burnt, the cars were burnt. The place was a mess. It was devastated. So this is the reality that we live in now with this government. And just so you understand, they're the minority now, although they're the government. I'll give you an idea of a poll that was taken not long ago says that a majority of Israelis, 56% of Israelis, see a hostage deal as a higher national priority than military action in Rafah, or in that small town, a small city in southern Gaza next to the Egyptian border, which has been our major goal. There's no reason for that to be a goal. I mean, let's face it, this whole war has been run without proper goals, without proper end of war
Strategies. No, it's not really organized. It's not really being directed. It's not really being produced. It's just sort of out of control.
Right. And who's fighting? Our sons and daughters.
But who's actually behind it? There's somebody behind it on both sides.
No, this is not a conspiracy as much as we have, like I said, we have the two radical elements of society running the show on each side of that border. And so, for instance, Hamas wants to be the heroes of the Palestinian people that eventually will bring the Palestinian state. And maybe, if they're lucky, get rid of the Jews, because that's part of their platform, is that when possible, Israel will no longer exist. I think that's called ethnic cleansing. And people tell me correctly, people tell me correctly, what Israel's been doing in the West Bank is ethnic cleansing. And there was ethnic cleansing that actually occurred in villages around me in the Western Galilee before there was a state of Israel. And now people are yelling out the motto, from the river to the sea. Okay, if you don't qualify that, and you just mean all of Palestine will be free, then what you're talking about is getting rid of the state of Israel. That's ethnic cleansing. If you're going to qualify it with saying from the river, which is the Jordan River, to the sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea, all of us must be free. Hey, I'm good with that. Where do I sign? But you got to be careful what you say. And what's been happening is, like I said, we've had this these radical elements running everything. Now, in Israel, the majority of people, 58% of the Jews and 81% of the Arabs as Israeli citizens say that it's now time for this government and everyone who is responsible, including military and intelligence and everybody who had any responsibility for the consistent chain of events of mess ups that happen or accountability, they have to step down now. So the situation is really, really right as we're speaking. My wife, I'm looking at the TV screen here behind me. My wife is at a big demonstration, a very big demonstration in Jerusalem right now, making a call for new elections, because it's very clear that this current government has only about 40% support from the people. And in normal times, you can get away with that. During a war, when our soldiers, we've had over 600 soldiers killed. Just last week, there were 8 Israeli soldiers who were killed. And of course, those numbers are small in comparison to the amount of Palestinians in Gaza who were killed.
But it still happened.
And we have no accountability for the Gazans who are getting killed. It's horrible. Now, I can tell you why that happens, and I'm not going to make up any excuses for it. I, therefore, have been, for decades, I've been a peace activist. And people would, laugh at that. They'd say, oh, yeah, you want to give everything away. No, that's not the point. I don't think we should be living in constant war. And there is an alternative. And I know because I've actually edited an entire peace agreement. It can be done. It just depends on the leaders saying, well, we don't have to agree, but why don't we sit down and try? Let's take this Geneva Initiative Final Status Agreement and use it kind of as a roadmap, and let's see where we can go. Because that was in 2003. A lot has changed on the ground. Within a matter of a month or two, the changes on the ground could be taken care of, and we could be living in a different situation. Now, you take all of that, and you say, okay, these guys are still a little strange, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're talking about the Hamas. People will tell you, supporters of Israel, it doesn't make sense when you're talking about Hamas. And then supporters of the Palestinians will tell you, that really doesn't make sense when you're talking about Israel. In other words, they don't honor their agreements. And the other side will say they don't. And it's mommy, he hit me first situation.
Yeah, she said, give me the name of your document again. The Geneva what?
The Geneva Initiative Final Status Agreement. Why Geneva in terms of Israel? Because the Swiss invited the two negotiating sides to Geneva to start whittling down a peace agreement. Okay.
Well, because the original peace agreement, and if anything, it's like an amendment or an alternative or another idea, but your team, it's your job to get it in front of the government, the power people. It's probably I don't know how it's going to get there. I have a feeling you're going to make history. Okay.
Well, there's two approaches. There's two approaches, and each approach has its strengths and weaknesses. Let's be absolutely clear. Even if the two governments come together and come up with the best, most finely detailed agreement, and it seems like everything's just going to be wonderful, if either of those two sides don't have the support of their people,
it's not going to happen.
Hold water.
I understand.
And even I'm usually an optimist. I'm about as optimistic as you'll find in Israel for sure. But even when we do finally reach an agreement and we finally have a status of not necessarily peace, but a just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we won't be able to just go to their side and have hummus and invite them here to come and pray in the mosque in the neighboring city here of Akko. We're not going to be really friends necessarily, but we can, like with Egypt, have peace. Masses of Egyptians have not come to visit Israel. Most Israelis have not gone to visit Egypt, but we've had this peace agreement, which means we're not fighting a war. And if all you will constantly have, even after we make this agreement, we will constantly have other extremists who then become even more extremists if peace is reached, or if an end of war is reached, and they say, no, you're traitors, you're giving in to the cause and whatever. So we're going to go out and blow up a bus, or we're going to go out and rampage throughout an Arab village or whatever.
Let me interrupt you.
Sure.
I have a question. I know we discussed this in the previous interview, which people, if you're listening, this is Dr. Linda Salvin. You're watching Psychic Solutions podcast with my guest from Israel, Moshe Chertoff, who I grew up with here in Los Angeles, California, many decades ago. And we're talking about the peacemakers within Israel, and Moshe is one of them. My question is, and I'm going to say it again, because I always think of Sadat, I think of Golda Meir, I think of the peace treatments and agreements they signed 40 years ago, 50 years ago. What happened? Why was it on its way? They signed, they had dinner, they talked kids, they talked family, they became human. In the movie, you see, well, I mean, not the movie, but the movie was excellent. But as far as a documentary on Golda, she explains she had a Palestinian passport. She explains before the state of Israel was created in 1948, everybody was considered a Palestinian on that side. She explained all that, and yet she was one of the peacemakers to actually succeed as prime minister. What happened where it broke? This is where I get confused, and I'm sure most people do. It started, she reached something, then it fell apart again.
She never really reached something.
I thought she did.
Really
I thought they signed the agreement.
She had an understanding. No, she didn't. Begin signed the peace agreement with Egypt, not Golda. When Sadat came to Israel and came to the Knesset, she met with him, and they had a camaraderie between themselves and joked between themselves. But part of what you said is part of the problem, and back then I said that. And the reason is that you can make peace with all of the Arab or Muslim states around us, and that would be fabulous. But if you're circumventing the Palestinian problem, it's not going to be over.
Oh, I see. So I see where I'm getting confused, because it's the whole general demographic and geographic area, but there's still the two populations, or the two
peoples.
States, the two states, the two states, the two peoples, that even though the rest of it's starting to understand, it's still the tension is right here.
And again, let's not forget, 79% of Israelis are Jews, 21% of Israelis are non-Jews, which means either they're Muslims or Christians or Druze. That's another group of type of religion, a breakaway from Islam. 21% of Israeli citizens are not Jews. And we have always strived, we, meaning the people of my understanding, have always strived to make them equal citizens. There should be, in one sentence, my Israel or my Zionism is to have, yes, did anybody cringe when I said the word Zionism? I hope not. Anyway.
Some people are going to misunderstand the term.
Of course. So I'll explain it in one sentence. Like every people in the world, the Jewish people need a homeland that should also be the democratic state of Israel. It should be a democratic state with all of its citizens having equal rights, equal, what's the other word?
Like benefits?
Responsibilities. Well, also responsibilities. I mean, if you're going to have an army, everybody has to serve in the army. If you're going to be giving away stuff, plots of land to some people, you have to give it away to everybody. In other words, there has to be a striving, at least always, for equality. There's never equality. Nobody's ever equal with anybody else, but a striving toward, yes, except the other side of the people who are not in my group, or not in my understanding, passed a law a couple of years ago called the nation state law, which in essence said the non-Jews in Israel will now be second-class citizens. At the time, I was an advisor for a Muslim member of Knesset, a friend of mine who lives in the 4,000-year-old city of Akko, right 3 miles from me. And he was serving in the Knesset. And then they passed this law, and he said, I can't be in the Knesset after I'm being told that from now on I'm a second-class citizen. So he quit. He was the first victim of this nation-state law. And in essence, what you've told, like the Western Galilee behind me, where we have the Mediterranean over here behind the camera, which is only like 1.5 miles away, and it's beautiful coastline. And then we have the coastal road, and you have villages, you have kibbutzim, we won't go into all of the details right now, and you have small cities and larger cities, and then you get to the fields, and the fields go up into the hills of the Galilee that way at the top of the hills of the Galilee, it then goes down to the Sea of Galilee. That's the north of Israel. The Galilee is a majority non-Jewish, and we get along great. We really get along great. Most Jews understand Arabic. Almost all of the Arabs understand Hebrew. Throughout Israeli society, without the Arab population, we would not have a national health system, our hospitals would be almost empty. Our nursing homes would be almost empty. Drivers, the great percentage of drivers in Israel are also Arabs or Palestinians, however they want to define themselves. So we have to understand that it's not just up to us Jews to decide how things should go. That's right. But unfortunately, the people in this government think that, hey, don't tell us what to do. This is our country. God gave it to us. You don't like it? You got another 22 Arab states around you. Go
Yeah, but
you
it's not just there; it's here too. Because you know what? We're so divided back here in the States. It's worse than when we were growing up. Yes, we used to be able to feel Republican and see the Democratic parties, and now it's one big mess. And it's all this. And nothing's being done. What?
Not only now. I remember in 1968.
Yeah,
I had a bumper sticker on my white Tempest back then. There was something about living together in peace and whatever, and a statement. And I remember coming out of the Grant High School parking lot and seeing that the bumper sticker was burned off, and they put a bumper sticker that said, "America, love it or leave it."
I remember that. I remember that.
So things have been like that in the background. The problem isn't that those things are in the background. The problem is when those people in the background, or those crazy, wacko elements of society, get empowered to become part of government, then you begin to dissolve what government really should work like. And it was during the Bush era, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's people who probably have other theories about this also. But anyway, there has not been cooperation, across the aisle cooperation in America for years.
No.
And to make it even crazier, let's take just for example, during the Trump period, he all of a sudden had this pandemic. Sure.
I don't know. This was just fixed. I'm sorry. Go on. Oh, sorry. By the way, we only have 4 minutes left, so we got to start wrapping up. I'd like to invite you to come back for a third show, but go ahead. Let's finish up here. But you're right. The breakdown.
So to give you an example of what's happened in America, President Trump was in power when a global pandemic started. And he did a great thing about getting a vaccination quickly developed and passed by the Food and Drug Administration, whatever. I know there are people who are against the vaccinations and whatever. But anyway, he said to everybody has to get vaccinated. He was switched. He suddenly became the former president of the United States. And it became the entire Republican Party said, it's all, do not vaccinate, never vaccinate. He was just the one leading the whole thing. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong.
He's the spokesperson. Any president's just the spokesperson from everybody behind. That's a whole nother topic that we really can't talk about here. Let's wrap it up. We got 2 minutes. Okay.
So I'm one of the leaders of what's called the Forum of Israeli Peace NGOs. We represent approximately 127 NGOs whose main, if not sole purpose, is to create peace between us and the Palestinians. And when we say peace, we mean a just peace. No one should win saying, haha, we made peace and we got the most out of it. No, it has to be a just peace. People were kicked out.
A co-op. Everybody has to get together as one.
Right. So the people who are removed from their land or left voluntarily have to get compensation. We have to be able to live together. A homeland for the Jewish people, state of Israel, next to and in cooperation with a homeland of the Palestinian people.
Okay, today is June 17th. We're pre-recording this show because you want to explain to the people, which is going to air on the 27th of June, what's happening in July.
On July 1st, there's an event that will be in the largest sports arena in Israel, indoor sports arena. We're planning on having approximately 8,000 people attend a peace conference being led by one man who has the right to talk peace. Both of his parents were killed on October 7th. This is a guy who says, we're not going to get anywhere like this. So my parents were killed, their parents were killed. That's the way we're going to continue to live. As Netanyahu would say, we're going to continue living by the sword for eternity. No, let's cut to the chase and make a just settlement for both sides so that down the line, we will actually be able to live together. We won't necessarily be best of friends, but I do have good friends in Palestine. And I hope that they consider me a good friend. And there's
And
no
that's
reason
July
to-
1st in Israel.
July
If
1st
people
in
want to
Israel.
reach you, where can they find you or need more information?
On
about
Facebook, anybody can reach me by the name that appears on the screen.
Or Shay
I'm on
Chertoff?
Facebook. Yes, and you can also look for my name or what's called the this is Israel's Slippery Slope podcast, which I talked about from the very beginning of the demonstrations, and we've done a few also during the war. We're about to do another one soon about peace, because the majority of Israelis want peace. They realize this has got to end someday, and why not do it as soon as possible?
And right now the show has to end, and I'm so sorry, but I do want to invite you back for more. And I think there's another person we can have some conversation with. Stay backstage, Moshe. It's always it's so enlightening because it's something I'm not always understanding with the government and the political issues and what goes on. Even though I am a Jew, and hearing it firsthand just gives me chills. But I'm
not even most Israelis know.
That's why you're so brilliant. We'll talk to you soon. Shalom, my friend. I'll talk to you in a bit. Stay backstage. This is Dr. Linda Salvin. That's the end of Psychic Solutions today. The Peacemakers within Israel. Please listen to this over and over again. I have to. There's so much information. This man is a walking encyclopedia. He lives it. He's got the passion for it. And all we want is peace. It's not about color. Like I've said with many people on the show, we've split our breast open. We all bleed red blood, right? We're one human race. Maybe sometime on this planet, we will see peace. I'm Dr. Linda Salvin. I'm an MPH, PhD metaphysician, your host. You can contact me at the information at the end of this broadcast, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening or watching.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed Dr. Linda Salvin's Psychic Solutions podcast. You can reach Dr. Linda at 888-509-1077 or at lindasalvin.com. Need a breakthrough of your own? Ready for answers or insights nobody else has? Reserve your own one-on-one in-person chat. Dr. Linda isn't just for other people. Dr. Linda gets results for you. And it's easy. Contact details are on screen now. Just click on lindasalvin.com or call toll-free 888-509-1077. That's lindasalvin.com or toll-free at 888-509-1077.